The sunlight in our breakfast nook was too bright, a clinical, unforgiving white that made every speck of dust on the mahogany table look like a structural flaw. I sat there, tracing the grain of the wood with my thumb, waiting for Julianna. I am Julian, a man who for 12 years believed that love was a verb defined by service. I was the architect of her comfort. I knew the exact pressure she liked in her morning latte, the specific scent of jasmine that calmed her after a board meeting, and the silent art of disappearing when her mood turned jagged. I thought I was building a sanctuary. She thought I was building a cage of boredom. The front door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of our Seattle condo, sharp and final. Julianna walked in, the scent of expensive mimosas and a heavy, spicy cologne, one I didn't own, trailing behind her like a guilty shadow. She didn't look tired from brunch. She looked electric. She stood by the marble island, her silk blouse slightly rumpled, and looked at me with a detached sort of pity that hurt worse than a physical blow. "You're just so comfortable, Julian," she said. The words weren't yelled. They were dropped like stones into a dark well. "You're predictable. You're the man who always says yes before I even finish the question." I realized today, sitting with people who actually have fire in them, that I've never been married to a man. I've been married to a safety net. And God, Julian, a safety net is such a boring thing to look at every morning. My heart didn't race. It did the opposite. It slowed down, a heavy, rhythmic thud that felt like a countdown. "Is there someone else, Julianna?" I asked. My voice was a low, terrifyingly calm frequency. She tilted her head, a cruel, playful smile touching her lips. The look of a cat deciding whether a mouse is worth the kill. Does it even matter? Whether there is or isn't, the result is the same. You aren't enough to keep me awake anymore. You're just background noise. She walked past me to the stairs, leaving her phone on the counter to grab a charger from the drawer. It buzzed. The screen lit up against the dark marble. I didn't have to touch it to see the banner. "Last night was unforgettable. The way you looked in that light. I can't wait for the next round." I stared at the screen until it went dark. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vanished. The Julian who would have cried, who would have begged for a talk, who would have spent the next week trying to be more exciting, died on that kitchen floor. I didn't feel rage. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. She wanted a man who wasn't a safety net. I decided, right then, to let her fall. Psychologically, Julianna is exhibiting a classic case of hedonic adaptation combined with dismissive avoidant attachment. Because Julian provided a perfectly stable environment, she lost the ability to value peace, mistaking it for stagnation. She has dehumanized Julian into a function, the safety net, rather than a partner. Her rhetorical question, "Does it even matter?" is a profound act of emotional gaslighting. She is attempting to shift the blame for her infidelity onto his boring personality, suggesting his lack of fire gave her no choice but to seek it elsewhere. Julian's break is actually an emotional decoupling. By not reacting with a scandal, he denies her the dramatic conflict she needs to justify her actions. When an unfaithful partner is met with silence instead of pleading, their narrative of being the misunderstood seeker of passion begins to crumble. Julian is moving from a state of social compliance to sovereign autonomy. He is no longer playing the game by her rules. He is closing the board entirely. The safety net isn't just bored, it's being withdrawn, and the analysis shows that Julianna is completely unaware that she is now standing over a psychological abyss of her own making. Monday morning usually began with a choreographed ritual. I would wake at 6 a.m., brew a specific blend of Kenyan coffee, and have her gym bag packed by the door. I would check the weather for her commute and leave a post-it note with a word of encouragement. It was a life of small things that I believed added up to a big love. The old Julian didn't wake up that morning. I was out the door by 5:15 a.m. I didn't make coffee. I didn't pack a bag. I went to a boxing gym in a warehouse district I had previously avoided. The air there was thick with the smell of old leather and sweat, honest smells. I spent an hour hitting a heavy bag until my knuckles were raw and my lungs burned. It was the first time in years I had felt the edges of my own body. When I returned to the condo at 7:30 a.m. to shower for work, I found Julianna standing in the kitchen in her bathrobe. She looked disoriented. The kitchen was cold. No coffee. No bag. No Julian. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice sharp with a hint of genuine confusion. I have that presentation this morning. My gym clothes weren't in the car, and I had to make my own coffee. It was terrible. I walked past her to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and took a long drink. I didn't look at her. There's a Starbucks on the way to your office, I said. My voice was clipped, devoid of the usual melodic warmth. Julian, are you listening? I said I'm stressed. I paused at the foot of the stairs, looking at her as if she were a stranger asking for directions in a language I barely spoke. I heard you. You're stressed. It sounds like a personal challenge. I'm going to shower. I spent my lunch break at a high-end barber. I told him to take it all off, the soft, approachable fringe I kept because she liked it. He gave me a sharp, military-style fade. I went to a clothier and bought 3 tailored suits in dark charcoal and midnight blue. No more soft sweaters. No more comfortable husband clothes. When I came home that evening, I didn't ask her about the presentation. I didn't ask what she wanted for dinner. I walked into the study, poured a glass of neat bourbon, something I never drank, and opened a book on Greek history. I heard her heels clicking in the hallway. She stopped at the door, which I had left slightly ajar. She didn't come in. She stood there, waiting for the apology, waiting for the "I'm sorry I was late this morning" speech. I didn't look up. I turned a page. The silence between us wasn't a wall, it was a mirror. And for the first time, she was the one who didn't like what she saw. Here we observe the social strike of the provider. Julian is performing what psychologists call active indifference. By ceasing the invisible labor, coffee, gym bags, emotional check-ins, he is forcing Julianna to experience the gravity of reality. For years, she lived in a frictionless world because Julian was the lubricant. By removing himself, he is reintroducing friction into her life. His physical transformation, the gym, the haircut, the clothes, is a symbolic rebirth. He is shedding this soft masculinity she mocked and adopting a primal autonomy. Julianna's reaction, asking about the car and coffee, reveals her functional narcissism. She doesn't miss Julian the person, she misses Julian the servant. The analysis shows a shift in the power dynamic. Julian has moved from the anxious, preoccupied quadrant of the relationship to a secure, autonomous state. By not providing the emotional payout of an argument, he is starving her of the attention she uses to regulate her ego. He is no longer her safety net. He is becoming his own fortress. By Wednesday, the atmosphere in our luxury condo had transformed from a sanctuary into a high-pressure chamber. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a massive storm. For 12 years, I had been the one to break that silence. I was the one who would ask, "How was your day?" Or "Do you want to talk about it?" I was the emotional janitor, always cleaning up the messes she left behind. I didn't clean anymore. I started coming home late, not because I was hiding, but because I was finally exploring the city I had lived in but never truly seen. I sat in dimly lit jazz bars in Capitol Hill, watching the musicians lost in their own craft. I went to late-night bookstores and read poetry that I used to think was too vulnerable for a man like me. I was reclaiming my own time, second by second. When I walked through the front door at 10:45 p.m., the house was dark, save for a single lamp in the living room. Julianna was sitting on the sofa, a glass of expensive red wine in her hand. She was wearing the silk robe I had bought her for our last anniversary, the one she usually only wore when she wanted something. "Where were you, Julian?" she asked. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual bravado. "Out," I said, unbuttoning my new charcoal blazer. I didn't stop walking toward the stairs. "Out where? With whom?" She stood up, the wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. "You didn't answer my texts. You didn't tell me you wouldn't be home for dinner. I ordered Thai. It's sitting on the counter, cold." I paused, one foot on the first step. I looked at her, and for the first time in a decade, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no urge to apologize, no desire to fix her mood. "I didn't ask you to order food, Julianna. And as for where I was, I didn't think it mattered. After all, I'm just background noise, remember?" The color drained from her face. She looked as though I had slapped her, but all I had done was hand her back her own words. "You're being childish," she hissed, trying to regain her footing. "Is this some pathetic revenge? Because I hurt your feelings? You're acting like a stranger in your own house." "I'm not acting, Julianna," I said softly, my voice reflecting the cold clarity of the moonlight hitting the window. I'm just stopped being a safety net. If you feel like I'm a stranger, perhaps it's because you never bothered to know the man behind the service. I went to the guest room, the room I had quietly moved my things into on Monday, and locked the door. I heard her footsteps follow me. I heard her hand rest on the handle. She didn't turn it. She stood there for a long time, her breathing ragged on the other side of the wood. For years, I would have opened that door. I would have pulled her into my arms and promised to be whatever she wanted me to be. Tonight, I just turned off the light and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who had finally stopped carrying a mountain that wasn't his to move. This chapter highlights a profound shift in attachment theory. For most of their marriage, Julian occupied the anxious role, constantly seeking connection and reassurance. Julianna occupied the avoidant role, distancing herself and devaluing his efforts to maintain her sense of independence. By Julian moving into secure detachment, he has forced Julianna into a state of anxious preoccupation. Psychologically, Julianna is experiencing locus of control shock. She relied on Julian's predictability to feel superior. Without his constant pursuit, her own sense of self-worth is beginning to crumble. Her accusation that he is being childish is a defense mechanism called projection. She is the one struggling to regulate her emotions, so she projects that instability onto him. The analysis shows that Julian's silence is far more damaging to her ego than any shouting match could be. By gray-rocking her, becoming as unresponsive and uninteresting as a rock, he is starving her of the narcissistic supply she used to fuel her affair. He is no longer her safety net, and she is realizing, with mounting horror, that the fire she sought in others is cold comfort when the foundation of her life is gone. Friday arrived like a verdict. I spent the day at the office, but I wasn't working on blueprints. I was working on my exit. I had called a lawyer on Tuesday. I had seen a realtor on Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, the architecture of silence was complete. I had a lease signed on a small, honest apartment by the water, and my half of our joint accounts had been moved into a private trust. When I came home, the house smelled of garlic and rosemary. Julianna was in the kitchen, actually cooking, a task she hadn't performed in years. She had changed her hair. She was wearing a dress that she knew I loved. "I made lamb," she said, her voice hopeful, almost pleading. "And I bought that bottle of scotch you like, the one from the Highlands." "I'm not hungry, Julianna," I said, walking past the kitchen to the bedroom to pack my final suitcase. She followed me, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. "Julian, stop. Just stop for a second. I was wrong, okay? I said those things because I don't know, I was frustrated. I didn't mean them. You're a man. You're my man. Let's just go back to how it was. Let's go to bed and forget this week ever happened." She reached out and grabbed my arm, her body pressing against mine. It was a calculated move, the use of intimacy as a weapon of restoration. In the past, this would have worked. I would have surrendered to the touch and let the betrayal slide back into the darkness. I gently, but firmly, unhooked her hand from my arm. I looked into her eyes that were now wet with tears of genuine panic, and I saw the text message from Sunday in my mind. "Last night was unforgettable. You can't fix a foundation by painting the walls, Julianna," I said. My voice was devoid of malice, which made it even more final. "You didn't just say things. You showed me who you are. And more importantly, you showed me who you think I am. You don't love me. You love the convenience of me. You love the way I made your life easy so you could be reckless with someone else." "I'll end it," she sobbed, dropping the facade entirely. "I'll never see Marcus again. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me in this silence. I can't handle the silence." "The silence is the only honest thing left between us," I said, zipping the suitcase. "I'm not staying to be your safety net while you look for fire elsewhere. I'm going to go find my own." I walked down the stairs, suitcase in hand. She stood at the top of the landing, a vision of silk and desperation, framed by the expensive life I had built for her. "You'll be alone," she screamed. "Nobody will love you the way I did." "I hope not," I said, opening the front door. "Because the way you loved me was a slow death. Take care of yourself, Julianna." I stepped out into the cool Seattle night. I didn't look back. As I drove away, I didn't feel the weight of a failed marriage. I felt the lightness of a man who had finally stopped holding up a sky that wasn't his to carry. The final confrontation is a study in hysterical bonding. When a partner senses they are truly losing their source, the provider, they often experience a sudden, intense surge of love and sexual desire. This is not genuine affection. It is a survival response aimed at reestablishing the status quo. Julian's refusal to engage in this bonding is his final act of sovereignty. Psychologically, Julian has completed the grief cycle at an accelerated pace because he began the process the moment he saw the text on Sunday. By the time Julianna attempted her seduction, he had already reached acceptance. Her scream that "nobody will love you the way I did" is the ultimate narcissistic injury. She cannot imagine a world where he is happy without her because she views him as a secondary character in her story. The analysis proves that the silence she feared was actually her own internal echo chamber. Without Julian to act as her emotional buffer, she is forced to face her own infidelity and her own hollow values. Julian's exit isn't just a divorce, it's a systemic reset. He has moved from a role to a being, leaving her to stand in the ruins of a museum she thought she owned. The first month in my new apartment was a study in sensory deprivation. I had moved into a space that was the antithesis of the condo I shared with Julianna. There were no marble islands, no smart home systems that anticipated my every move, and no scent of expensive jasmine lingering in the air. It smelled of fresh paint, cedarwood, and the sharp, bracing salt of the Puget Sound. For the first few nights, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, my heart racing, my mind already cataloging Julianna's needs. I would reach for a phone to check her schedule, only to find the nightstand empty. That was the phantom limb of the provider, a psychological ghost of a man who had spent a decade living for someone else. I didn't call her. I didn't check her social media. I blocked her on every platform, not out of a desire to hurt her, but because I needed to protect the silence I had fought so hard to find. I spent my evenings sitting on a simple leather chair, watching the ferries cross the dark water. I was learning to be bored without being lonely. I was learning that my predictability wasn't a flaw. It was a form of discipline that I could finally turn toward my own life. I threw myself into my work, but with a different energy. I wasn't designing buildings to impress her or to fund a lifestyle that kept her excited. I was designing for the sake of the stone and the steel. My colleagues noticed the change. I was sharper, more decisive. I no longer apologized for my boundaries. 6 months in, I received a letter. Not an email or a text, but a physical envelope from Sarah, Julianna's closest friend. I opened it over a cup of black coffee. "She's a mess, Julian. The guy she was seeing, Marcus, he disappeared the moment you left. Turns out he liked the idea of a wealthy, bored wife, but he didn't want the reality of a woman who lost her foundation. She's drinking too much. She keeps asking why you didn't at least scream at her. She says the silence is killing her." I folded the letter and put it in the trash. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the ego boost of knowing she was suffering. I just felt a profound, heavy sense of pity for the woman who didn't understand that a safety net is a person, not a piece of furniture. She had traded a mountain for a sparkler, and she was surprised that the light didn't last. Here explores the identity reconstitution phase of a high-value male post-betrayal. Julian's phantom limb syndrome is a documented psychological phenomenon in long-term caregivers. When the object of care is removed, the caregiver's brain continues to fire in service mode. His refusal to check her social media is an act of digital stoicism, preventing the pain shopping that keeps many victims trapped in a cycle of trauma bonding. The letter from Sarah reveals the parasitic collapse. Julianna's affair with Marcus was a secondary gain relationship. Marcus didn't love Julianna. He loved the recklessness she could afford because Julian provided her security. Once the security, the foundation, was removed, the fire was extinguished. Psychologically, Julianna is now experiencing total devaluation. She is seeking Julian's anger because anger is still a form of connection. By remaining silent, Julian is practicing permanent indifference, which is the only true exit from a narcissistic dynamic. He is no longer defined by her betrayal. He is defined by his own recovery. The analysis shows that the architecture of solitude is the only place where a man can truly rebuild his internal locus of control. The marriage of Julian and Julianna serves as a clinical study in the devaluation of stability. Julian functioned as the secure base, a psychological anchor whose reliability became invisible through its own perfection. Julianna's luxury boredom led to a category error. She mistook his disciplined peace for a lack of masculinity, failing to realize that his consistency was an immense exertion of willpower, not a lack of fire. Julianna's betrayal was a parasitic exploitation of Julian's high agreeableness, which she misread as a lack of self-respect. Julian's strategic silence was a masterful psychological pivot. By refusing to provide the emotional theater she needed to justify her affair, he forced her into a state of narcissistic injury. He replaced the nurturing provider role with protective autonomy, effectively withdrawing the safety net and leaving her to face the void of her own internal hollows.